Tonight is the night that we do begin our summer series. We kick that off tonight. We've got a great lineup this year, both with speakers and topics. If you haven't had a chance to look at that list, it's posted on the bulletin board in the back. Take a look at that. There's a lot of good topics on there. We're giving Oakwood Road a break tonight. We have Brother Brent Gallagher with us tonight, and Brent's topic tonight is, how can we know the Bible is right? So I'm sure he'll deliver us a good message from that. So let's enjoy Brent tonight.
I was going to use the portable mic, but can you hear me okay without this? Okay. I'd like to handle this like a class. Got a question, comment, raise your hand or yell it out or whatever. I had a teacher in college who said class discussions were pooled ignorance, and maybe we can see tonight whether that's true or not. But I am glad to be here, and the topic, if I can get the projector to work, do I need to hit something on here? Shutter, maybe shutter. Shutter the thought. I didn't hit that before. Hit it that way. Point it up this way. Lay it flat on the pulpit. There we go. Thank you, Dane. I guess the first thing is you need to get the topic right when you do something, and the topic tonight is how do we know the Bible is right, or as I put it, can we trust our Bible? So that's what I thought the topic was. What I'd like to do tonight is just basically look at, there's so much material on that topic, I don't know where to begin. I think it's very, very important we deal with what we call apologetics, and when we say apologetics, we mean defending the Bible against various attacks. Maybe 100 years ago, probably most within the church, we would be arguing with our religious friends about maybe baptism, the nature of the church, how one's saved, things of that nature. We live in a different world today. We're not even dealing with those issues with most people, I think. I think with most people, we're dealing with the questions of, is there really a God? And is the Bible really His Word? And so we need to be fairly well informed in this area. So the title is, Can We Trust Our Bible? We all know the passage, 2 Timothy 3:16 and 17, and I'm guessing, I'm not going to spend time trying to look at Bible verses that say the Bible is from God. There's plenty of them, hundreds of times in the Old Testament. References are made such as the word of the Lord came to Isaiah, the word of the Lord came to Moses, or things of this nature. Of course, similar in the New Testament. And so the Bible claims to be from God. The question is, how do we know that? I want to spend just a few minutes on just simply the text of the Bible, and that's a very difficult topic in some ways, but just very briefly, the reliability of the text of our English Bibles. The Bible didn't fall out of heaven one day. God didn't speak a miracle and it came down. Rather, He worked through human beings to produce a perfect book. Now, how He did that, I can't explain it. We call it inspiration. But the reality is that if you look at the Bible as far as the text, many times arguments are made. People say, well, the Bible's been translated so many times, handed down over so many centuries and so forth. How do you know what you have is the Word of God? There's almost no comparison between the Bible, especially the New Testament, and available histories. And I'll get into that in just a second as far as some of the evidence for this. But if you look at some of the evidence, and we talk about textual criticism, it's the examination of the textual transmission by which documents reach us. And those who do this compare it almost to ancestry, genealogies, because they start tracing this out, and they can see certain translations or certain methods of writing coming down through certain families, as they call them. And they can trace things back for a couple thousand years to the time of the New Testament. We have available, I think, somewhere over 5,300, maybe the newer number is 5,500 Greek manuscripts of the New Testament. And there's nothing even close to this in ancient literature. Now, when I say that, this doesn't mean there are 5,300 New Testaments that were all written 100 AD. But we have, for example, they call it the John Rylands Papyrus. It's found in, I think it's in Cairo, Egypt. It's dated to around 125 AD. And it has part of the Gospel of John. This part of the fragment of the Gospel of John is probably 25 to 30 years removed from when John actually wrote his Gospel, if he wrote it in the AD 90s. You compare something like that to Herodotus, who was a Roman historian, lived 300 BC. The newest copy of his history was written about 1000 AD. So in other words, you have 1,300 years separating when Herodotus wrote his history and when we have our oldest copy of it. When John wrote the Gospel of John, parts of that we're removed maybe 20, 30 years. And you extend the years a little bit more, and you find that as far as the Bible is concerned, and especially the New Testament, there's so much evidence. It's overwhelming. You look at what they call lectionaries, which we call Bible class literature, which was written the first few centuries, letters, articles, or whatever you might want to call them, sermons written by so-called church fathers, quoting the Bible before the Bible even came together completely. So the point is, and I don't want to, we can't get into this a whole lot tonight, but basically there's so much evidence for the reliability of the text. Now the reality is some texts are a little different. Even though there's over 5,300 manuscripts, there are differences, and we're somewhat aware of them, but none of these differences are significant. As a matter of fact, there are basically four big passages which people argue about, but if you even take these passages out of the Bible that they shouldn't be there, it wouldn't change one truth that's found in the Bible. Westcott and Hort, they lived in the late 1800s, and they did quite a bit of work on the transmission of the text of the New Testament. Westcott said, if comparative trivialities such as changes of order, the insertion or omission of the article with proper names and the like are set aside, the words, in our opinion, still subject to doubt can hardly amount to more than 1,000th part of the whole New Testament. And I think that's a pretty accurate number. Here's what happens. Style changes. If you ever read even some of the documents, the founding of our country, the way S's were written, they look like F's. If it's a final S, it's written differently. Sometimes the English spelling with maybe the word program having two M's and an E on the end. That happened in every language. It happened in the Greek language. And so a lot of these are stylistic differences over centuries. How they were transmitted has nothing to do with the reliability of it. What they call, the Greek has what they call a movable nu. The letter nu is the Greek word in. And just as we put in before, if we're going to say a car, we put A because it starts with a consonant. But if we're going to use, let's see, an icicle, if we're going to start the next word with a vowel, we'd put an N on the A. Well, Greek does the same thing with different words, and they call it the movable nu, or we'd say the movable N. But here's the problem. If you have, let's say, 1,000 Greek manuscripts where they use the movable nu for certain words, and then the next 1,000 don't, enemies of the Bible say, well, there's like 1,000 discrepancies there in the Bible. And that's the problem you run into when you look at the reliability of the text. We can look at it and say, well, that's amazing that the Bible has so accurately been handed down. Others will just say, well, it's full of errors. There's probably 100,000 errors in the Bible. And what they're saying is there probably are 100,000 differences. Many of these differences are so minor, it just has to do with spelling changes and things of that nature. With that in mind, we're going to go ahead and look very quickly at inspiration. Question at all in the text of the Bible? Okay, I gave you 2 seconds. That's good. All right. The Bible, unique book. Unique means one of a kind or only. Obviously, the Bible claims to be a revelation from God. Many evidences which prove the Bible truly is from God and that truly is a unique book. And all these proofs are necessary, but they're not necessarily sufficient. For example, I could have a history book which is entirely accurate with no mistakes. That doesn't mean it dropped down out of heaven. I can have a science book which is entirely accurate with no errors. That doesn't mean it's from God. But on the other hand, if the Bible is full of historical and scientific errors, then it can't be inspired as it claims to be. Other proofs, such as predictive prophecy, suggest a supernatural origin for the Bible. And we'll deal with predictive prophecy in just a little bit. This one look on maybe sort of a subjective way of looking at the Bible, its unique teachings. We go to the Sermon on the Mount, where basically Jesus talks about loving your brother or loving your enemy, praying for them, doing good to them. The golden rule, what you want men to do to you, do also to them, for this is the law and the prophets. Was this a common teaching in the Roman world? What might makes right, wasn't it? There's a letter in James Toll, one of his books on the Sermon on the Mount, quotes a Roman captain who lived in the 1st century. They had no respect for human life. I mean, very little. And he wrote a letter to his wife who was expecting a child, and the letter said, when the baby's born, if it's a boy, treat it well, raise it up until I can get back from wherever I am. If it's a girl, throw it out. I mean, that's how they lived. That's how they treated human life. Infanticide, killing of infants was common, obviously abortion and things of this nature. Jesus came into that world and taught something different. As a matter of fact, a man, I like the title of the book, this is quoted from, it's A Few Buttons Missing by Fisher and Hawley, talking about the Sermon on the Mount. This guy was a psychologist. He says, if you take the sum total of all authoritative articles ever written by the most qualified of psychologists and psychiatrists on the subject of mental hygiene, if you were to combine them and refine them and cleave out the excessive verbiage, if you were to take the whole of the meat and none of the parsley, you would have an awkward and incomplete summation of the Sermon on the Mount. And it would suffer immeasurably through comparison. For nearly 2,000 years, the Christian world's been holding in its hands the complete answer to its restless and fruitless yearning. Here rests the blueprint for successful human life with optimum mental health and contentment. And I'm not saying, and obviously there are many issues involved when we talk about mental health or mental illness, but I'm talking about just generally life in general. Don't we understand it's good mental health not to hold anger within you, to treat people better, treat people properly? You can pay a whole lot of money and go have someone tell you that, or you can read the Sermon on the Mount and try to practice it. But again, the uniqueness of some of the teachings on the Bible that didn't reflect the same teachings of people who lived in the time of Jesus. You know, even the uniqueness of its influence. And this is where, Christianity has some baggage. I guess that's sort of an understatement if you look at the world around us. But, we've been everything bad and evil in the world has come through Christianity. I don't want to, I'm being sarcastic, but I don't want to minimize bad things that have been done in the name of Christ or religion. There's been plenty of it. But when we can try to separate, people who claim to be Christians and the bad they've caused with what Christianity has done, where the Bible has gone, basically there's been respect for life, there has been morality, and there has been hope. And again, I know there's exceptions to this, but if you study much, even the history of hospitals and universities in this country, they're started by religious people. Even the Ivy League schools were originally basically preacher schools. Now they've gone so far away from that. Even if you talk about slavery, and it's a horrible thing. And I was reading a book about slavery on the Isle of Barbados, and it was just a horrible thing. And a lot of it was promulgated by members of the Church of England, Episcopalians at the time. But even though they were promoting it and trying to defend it, it's interesting, those who were fighting the most against it were some Quakers who had moved to that island. So my point is, sometimes as Christians, we don't have a real pretty picture or history necessarily. But on the other hand, those who have tried to do right usually have been people who have followed God or followed the Bible. So there is a uniqueness of its influence. The wonder of its survival. Jesus said, heaven and earth will pass away, my word will not pass away. The grass withers, the flower fades away, and the word of the Lord abides forever. So many different people down through the years have tried to destroy the Bible. Antiochus Epiphanes lived in between the Testaments. He was basically a Syrian ruler, and he claimed to be Almighty God. And he's the one, if you read the books of Maccabees, he's the one who offered to sow on the altar just to irritate the Jews. And he tried to destroy every single copy of the Old Testament that he could. And obviously he was not successful. Diocletian was a Roman emperor who lived around 300 AD. He tried to exterminate Christianity, exterminate the Bible. Voltaire, Thomas Paine, Ingersoll, others who have been were very vocal about destroying the Bible, yet it continues to exist. H.G. Wells, of course, wrote War of the Worlds and many different books. He had his own version of the Bible. He didn't believe in any of the miracles, and so he wrote his own New Testament. He wrote his own copy of the Gospels and took out the miracles of Jesus. He did this, I'm guessing, late early 1900s. And he very arrogantly proclaimed that his Bible would be the one that would be read 100 years from now. And you have a copy of H.G. Wells' Bible. It's a pretty well read, pretty common book, And there's been many people down through the years who have done this. Even the so-called friends today, liberal critics of the Bible that claim they believe in it have attacked it. But it's still here, and it's still accurate in spite of the charges that some people try to make. Some evidences, we'll look very quickly. I got 22 slides, so I'm going through them here. Historical accuracy. The Bible is historically accurate. It's never been shown to be wrong, and in every instance where there has been a contradiction between the Bible and other histories, the Bible has always been shown to be correct. I got a few pet peeves. As I get older, they increase. Standing in the express lane, 10 items or fewer, and someone's got 20 and they're writing a check and they have to go get the price on something. That's one of my pet peeves. But if you get your religion from the History Channel or the Discovery Channel, whenever they have some good shows on there about archaeology and Bible stories, but whenever there's a supposed discrepancy or difference between what they think they know and what the Bible says, which side do they take? it's always, well, we know the Bible's wrong here. And what will happen is, it has happened in the past, if more evidence comes along that shows the Bible was right, you don't hear that, and they just move on to another topic. The 1800s, there was actually started in the late 1700s, there were many, many critics of the Bible. They're tearing the Bible apart. And really what's happened in our culture today, it's taken about 200 years for that to filter down to the common man. But starting in the early 1800s, late 1700s, and it started at the universities, and eventually went to universities like Princeton, Yale, University of Chicago, doubting the inspiration of the Bible. And their professors and preachers didn't believe in the inspiration of the Bible. And like I say, after a matter of time, it finally has filtered down to the common man in America, where we don't believe the Bible. Abraham and the patriarchs, charges were made in the early 1800s that the life that's described by Abraham and the time he lived, the animals they had, and the culture and so forth, just simply was not true. The Hittites, for dozens of years, they said, well, the Bible mentions the Hittites. We have no record of the Hittites even existing anywhere outside of the Bible. Solomon and his wealth, he had tremendous wealth. He had a navy. He had they claim that the amount of gold that's in the Bible that Solomon had is more than the known available gold in the world today. King Sargon of Isaiah chapter 20, verse 1, an Assyrian king, was said not to exist. Quirinius, Luke chapter 2, verse 2, was listed as the governor of Syria. When Jesus was born, they said that was wrong. Licinius was called the Tetrarch of Abilene when Jesus was born. They claimed that was wrong. Luke refers to the rulers of Thessalonica in the Greek word politarch. And critics of the Bible said that word politarch is never used of local rulers in Greek cities. Well, every single accusation that was made in the 1800s was proven to be wrong. That the more they evidenced and the more they used archaeology and so forth, the Abraham that's described in Genesis and the patriarchs, they did reflect what was going on in the ancient world. The same thing with the Hittites. And the word politarch, what's interesting, Sir William Ramsay is the one who found this out, that they started doing research and found out that actually Luke was the most accurate historian, and all these other histories were wrong, who had written about the first century world. Sir William Ramsay, this is a quote from him. He was pretty much an agnostic. He lived in England. He wasn't really an atheist, but he was a person who sort of questioned God's existence and questioned, the Bible. And he went to modern-day Turkey. It'd be, the Asia Minor of New Testament days. And he went with a purpose. He went to basically prove that the book of Luke was full of myth and fable, mistakes, as was the book of Acts. And he became a believer. He says, I found myself brought into contact with the book of Acts as an authority for the topography, antiquities, and society of Asia Minor. It was gradually borne upon me that in various details the narrative showed marvelous truth. In fact, beginning with the fixed idea that the work was essentially a second century composition, and that's what critics of the Bible always do. They always say, well, these books were written a lot later than you realize, and never relying on its evidences as trustworthy for the first century conditions. I gradually came to find it a useful ally in some obscure and difficult investigations. And there's much more he wrote on that, but basically he found out that Luke actually was telling the truth in all these situations. Of course, we'd suggest that, he had some help behind him, obviously guided by the Holy Spirit. Very quickly, archaeology. We think about archaeology. It cannot prove the Bible per se. It can corroborate it. As I've already mentioned, 1800s, the Bible considered inaccurate. But the archaeologist Spade has become the friend of defenders of the Bible. Last 30 to 40 years. Again, the Bible's credibility has been questioned by some archaeologists, but it continues to shed much light. And I know some of you here deal a lot with apologetics, but there are sources out there that I think it's good for us to keep up on. Apologetics Press, Think Magazine, Christian Courier, and there are others that really deal with these issues because they're difficult at times, but smart people sort of dumb it down for the rest of us so that we can understand it. But obviously there's good material out there. I want to talk just briefly about scientific foreknowledge. When I say find scientific foreknowledge in the Bible, what am I saying? Does anybody have an idea? What if the Bible said the earth was square, or what if the Bible said the earth was on, a big turtle was known, how it used to... Okay, the more we know about science, the more we prove that the Bible all along was right. Okay, that's really what we're saying here, that the Bible written over thousands of years of time, and what time am I supposed to quit? 9:30. Pacific Standard Time. That'd be what, 12:30, 1:30 here? What time do I, about quarter till, 10 till? Quarter till I'm done? Okay, all right, I just saw the clock back there. I'll tell the story. When I was over in Ohio, there was a church I was preaching for. The church down the road had a big fight over the clock, and it's just typical stuff we fight over. And they had a lot of plant workers, did shift work and so forth, so they always had to know what time it was, and they were too embarrassed to be turning around and looking at the clock during church. They thought that was sinful. They didn't want the preacher to see them turning around, so their solution was they put it on the front of the pulpit. so that way, when, instead of just, you try to do it sort of subtly, look at that clock like this, and I've done it. I know you've all done it, so don't lie to me, But you put it right there, but then the bad thing is the preacher has to sort of lean over the pulpit to see what time it is. So anyway, enough of that. But scientific foreknowledge basically says, you go to other ancient books. Do they write with the fact that, the universe is, such a great, expansive thing? The ancient writers talk about so many stars that we can't even count them? And yet the Bible does this, and the Bible does it very subtly. The Bible doesn't say, the Bible's not a science textbook, as we understand, but it just has these different statements made in it, which later on, as we start studying, we look back and say, the Bible was accurate all along. Isaiah talked about the earth being circular, Isaiah 40, verse 22. Again, this was it Ptolemy was the one who found the circular earth? We got educators here or anything? Well, not public school educators. I mean the other kind. But anyway, I think the guy's name was Ptolemy, if I remember, who was an Egyptian that through measurement he's able to find out that the earth was circular, maybe, well, whatever, doesn't matter. But he was, I think, one of the first ones to really sort of come up with that idea, and he lived, I think, maybe shortly after Christ, and they didn't, of course, prove it until later on. But again, the ancients didn't think the earth was circular. Job talks about the earth being suspended in space, and Job is probably the oldest book of the Bible. He probably lived around the time of Abraham, sometime between Abraham and Noah, maybe pre-Abraham. And yet, why would somebody at that time even come up with this concept that somehow the earth is suspended in space? How can you even begin to have that idea unless there was some sort of divine help? One of my favorites, this is the mistakes that Moses does not make. There's a there's a medical textbook from the Egyptians called Papyrus Ebers. I don't know if any of you ever heard of this or read some of it. It's really interesting. It was written about the time that Moses lived. What kind of training, education did Moses have growing up? Pretty good. In Acts 7, Stephen says Moses was trained in all the ways of the Egyptians. Now, he probably got the best education possibly that an Egyptian could get. And so you read the medical textbooks of the time of Moses. Almost, I copied this off today, and I forgot to bring it, but you can Google it and look it up. It's interesting stuff. All of their cures usually involve rubbing animal dung into the human body. Okay, I'm not going to get too graphic, but if you have a cut, this calls for donkey dung. Sometimes it called for the urine from a father, and I don't know why, and they put that on something, and it could cure baldness. I think it was hippopotamus dung to be rubbed on the head. And yeah, Mike, what's that? And Mike Reese says it doesn't work. So you can go it's not that little bit of funny smell around his head. You know what that was. But we laugh about that. But where did Moses? You think about it. If Moses was probably trained in that kind of a background, and in the book of Leviticus, do you find that kind of stuff taught? What does Moses talk about? Infection spreads. You talk about, mildew, mold. Life being in the blood. You don't find those kinds of things found in the book of Leviticus. And the question I think people have to answer, the skeptic has to answer, is where did Moses come up with these ideas? Where? I think the only solution is God. I don't know any other solution. So, again, if I was reading one other thing on this Papyrus Ebers, they said, if the cure doesn't kill you, you will live. That's how they quoted it concerning these things. So anyway, enough of Moses and Leviticus. But there are many other examples we could look at. And again, the Bible just sort of has them strewn throughout. It's not like God says, here are 10 reasons as to why we have scientific evidence the Bible's from God. But it just sort of, you read these different passages and you find these things. Okay, comments, questions before we move on? Okay, let's see where we are. Okay, predictive prophecy. This is the one thing which I think, if you can say it's the strongest argument for the Bible, I think it is. I think they have to explain predictive prophecy. What do I mean by predictive prophecy? What's a predictive prophecy? Okay, maybe what's not a predictive prophecy? Okay, if I say today that the Florida Marlins were going to beat the Pirates last night, is that predictive prophecy? No, that's after the fact. A lot of so-called prophets, I can't think of her name. Who's the woman? I don't read the Inquirer. I do look at it standing in the grocery line on occasion. But what are some of the predictions at the end of the year that people make? Trouble in the Middle East, scandal in Washington, trouble in the, I mean, honestly, you read these things, trouble in the Kennedy family, you just go on down through there. Is that really prophecy? No, it's not. It's just guessing at what, you have a pretty good idea something's going to happen. Predictive prophecy, and we'll look at some of the characteristics of it here, is it's not just guessing based on available evidence, which many people do, our so-called soothsayers today. But it's defined, let's see here. Okay, a man by the name of T.H. Horn defines it this way: a miracle of knowledge, a declaration or description or representation of something future beyond the power of human, sagacity, however that's pronounced, sagacity, to discern or calculate its highest evidence that could be given to supernatural communion with deity, the truth of a revelation from God. That's a pretty involved sentence there, okay? But the point being, it's something that is extra, it's supernatural, we might say. It's outside of our abilities to make this kind of a prediction. We talk about predictive prophecies. First of all, it has to be specific and detailed as opposed to being vague. Did you ever see some of these fortune tellers on TV or read about some of them? Something good's going to happen in your life or something bad. Years ago, I think it was when Johnny Carson was still on. I can't remember. It was a fortune teller, and he was interviewing the man. It may have been Jay Leno later on, but this man said, he said, I basically read horoscopes, and sometimes people don't like what I tell them about their horoscopes, so they can go to another fortune teller and see what they have to say, and maybe they're right. So does that make any sense? You keep shopping until you find a fortune teller that says what you want to hear. And again, they're usually general, vague predictions, but these have to be specific and detailed. There must be sufficient time between the prophecy and the fulfillment. We can make guesses. I can make a guess about the Pirates and Marlins tonight, or I can make a guess about, sadly, the presidential election, which I have no clue. That's a whole other topic, But if you, 100 years before time, could predict Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, that's a Bible prophecy there, okay? The prophecy should not have historical overtones, we've already mentioned, and the fulfillment has to be clear and definite. There's so many Bible prophecies. Now, some of the Bible prophecies we look at are a little more vague and so forth, but I think there's more than enough evidence. I'm going to look at one specific. Isaiah chapters 40 through 48 are really good material. Isaiah's preaching a series of sermons to Jews who knew not to worship idols. But what were they doing? They were worshiping idols. They were claiming if there really is a God, he's not powerful enough to do what he should be doing. They were just saying, basically, we're free to live the way we want to. And in these chapters, Isaiah says, ask your idol gods if they can tell the future. And God says, I can. And bring forth their charge. He's challenging the Jews to say, give us a reason why you're worshiping idols. I can predict the future. I created the world. And there's a series of sermons, really good material. But in the midst of this, you find a prediction made. And remember, this is probably prophesied around at the very earliest or latest, 700 BC. He's talking about the power of God, who confirms the word of his servant, performs the counsel of his messengers, who says to Jerusalem, you shall be inhabited, to the cities of Judah you shall be built, and I will raise up her waste places, who says to the deep, be dry, and I will dry up your rivers, who says of Cyrus, he is my shepherd, he shall perform all my pleasure, saying to Jerusalem, you shall be built, to the temple your foundation shall be laid. First of all, when Isaiah uttered this prophecy, the temple was built. There were cities in Judah. There wasn't even a guy by the name of Cyrus. They didn't know who was being talked about. And as you look at this, it's an amazing prophecy concerning what was going to happen in Judah's future. as we read on, we find that this prophecy was made, at the earliest, probably 740, or the latest, or the earliest, let's say 700 BC. At that time, Assyria was a great world power. The temple in Jerusalem was standing. There was no known King Cyrus. The Babylonians capture this, or take over, actually, they conquered the Assyrians in 609 BC at the Battle of Carchemish, I believe. But anyway, the Babylonians conquer the Assyrians. They take Judah into captivity, 586 BC. They destroy the temple. About 70 years later, or than that, or 70 years from 606, but about 50 years from here, the Persians in turn conquer the Babylonians in 539 BC. And then 3 years later, the name of the king who allows Judah to return to rebuild their temple, to rebuild the city of Jerusalem and the cities of Judah is Cyrus. You think about that. Minimally, it was 140 years, or 160 years before this happened. God could give the specific name of the king, and the fact that these events hadn't even taken place hundreds of years or 100-some years before they even happened. That'd be like, think about American history, predicting the name of a president or events taking place in this country 140, 160 years ahead of time with the very name of the person. Now, how do we explain Isaiah doing this? A good guess? Is he just sort of good with names and had a good way of looking at it, or was he very simply inspired of God? And again, I think prophecies such as this, the skeptic who attacks the Bible has to somehow explain, how did Isaiah even have a clue concerning what was going to take place here? And of course, when you come to prophecy, you have to come to the prophecies concerning Jesus. There are well over 300 prophecies concerning Jesus. How does one explain these as pure chance, coincidence, or the fact that Jesus artificially fulfilled such prophecies? What were some of the prophecies about Jesus? Where he was going to be born, right? Bethlehem. Even Isaiah 53 concerning his death. He was both with the rich and the poor in his death. Even being brought up out of Egypt as a child. You remember Hosea, out of Egypt I've called my son. There's so many others. The events concerning the crucifixion, Judas, 30 pieces of silver, and you can go on and on and on. Now, some of these prophecies are more specific than others, and some might be well, you have to maybe look a little closer to understand it. But some are very direct, very easy to understand and interpret. So, again, how do we explain these prophecies? The liberal says, well, Jesus read his Old Testament, so he just went around doing these things. Of course, first of all, if you're 30 years old, it's sort of hard to go back and be born of a virgin, if you're going to redo these prophecies. You have to find the place of your birth, the events, again, concerning the crucifixion, and on and on. And how can we explain this unless the fact that God has given us a book which obviously is inspired? In the book entitled In Defense of Christ's Deity, this is where you get into, probability. Scholars have documented over 300 messianic prophecies in the Old Testament. From Genesis through Malachi, the history of Jesus is foretold in minute detail. Bible critics who wish to disprove Christ's deity must refute fulfilled prophecy. To accomplish this, one would have to contend that Jesus did not fulfill the prophecies genuinely, only appeared to fulfill them. With over 300 prophecies relating to Christ, none of these can be dismissed flippantly. It's impossible. Could Christ have fulfilled 300 plus prophetic utterances by chance? P.W. Stoner, rather unfortunate name, but anyway, P.W. Stoner and R.C. Newman selected just 8 specific prophecies and said the probability of one man fulfilling all of them was 1 to the 10 to the 17th. So that's a pretty good number, pretty good sized number. And again, the point is it's just impossible. As you say, it's basically absurd. So when you look at predictive prophecy, we've looked at just a little bit about Jesus and this one of King Cyrus. There are many, many, many in the Old Testament that we have to somehow explain. The prophecies about the establishment of the kingdom, the church, and on and on and on, and how this come about. So basically, as we draw this to a close, I guess we didn't have much of a discussion, but there are many, many evidences that the Bible is true. Obviously, there are many things people want to pick at to try to destroy the Bible, and it's always going to be like that. But I'd encourage you, if you don't have an interest much in this area, to read more in this area. It's the world's changing a lot. There's little question about that. I think biblical ignorance is probably an all-time high, at least in the United States. And we need, I think, to be trained in this area of knowing why we believe what we believe, and especially concerning the Bible. Okay. I guess there's about a minute left on the clock. Questions, comments?
Just like you read those choir magazines.
Okay.
You just read the cover. If you don't read the whole thing, then you don't get the details.
Get the details, yeah.
You never really know.
Well, I sort of subtly look at the stores I'm going by. I can sort of read the inside.
I mean, you never know what happens,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, and that's part of it too.
And a lot of people just give it up.
I read a quote. It was back in the 2008 election. It was about Barack Obama telling people that they hadn't been reading their Bibles. You know, it was about homosexuality. And I thought, you know, he hasn't been reading his Bible, you know. But I mean, you're right. We take a few passages here or there. We have to look at the whole picture. And if we don't, then we get a bad. And that's the Bible's used so much today like that. Pick one verse here, one verse there. And yeah, we do need the whole story. Okay. Any other comments, questions? Yeah, of Jesus, yeah. Yeah, and that's just one of, like, say, over 300, and it's amazing, you know, you can't, you know, well, anyway, that's, and obviously I think there's a reason God put those in there, so that we can believe his book. Okay. Guess I power this off then, or maybe not hit shutter, do some, I don't know.